What is going on, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Forward Thinking Founders. I am very grateful to have your attention, at least for the next 15 minutes of this episode. Forward Thinking Founders is a podcast where I interview pre-seed and seed stage founders about their products, what they want to build into the world, and why. We dive into how they spend their time, what's their vision, what's the origin stories, all these things, so you can learn all about what's coming tomorrow. Because these companies haven't hit critical scale yet. Most of them haven't hit product market fit. These are just early stage companies, and the big question is, what can this be? And in this podcast, we bring that out. So with that, I really hope you enjoy your time listening to today's episode. And I've already done 200 plus, so if you like this one, listen to some of the other ones, like with Imadi Kund, Austin Allred, Leah Culver. We have great interviews, so check it out, enjoy the repository, and for now, let's get into today's episode. Here we go. All right, how's it going, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Forward Thinking Founders, where we talk to founders about their companies, their visions for the future, and how the two collide. Today, I'm very excited to be talking to Chase Lee, who's a founder of Trustpage. Welcome to the show. How's it going?
It's good. Hey, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to have you on. I'm looking forward to learning more about what you're working on. For people that haven't heard of Trustpage, what are you working on? What is Trustpage?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Trustpage, we're really helping companies streamline the security evaluation process, particularly for software companies. Data is very delicate these days. There's a lot of it. And so when you're buying software, you have to make sure that it's being protected. And we make that easier really for both parties. So we make it easier for customers to self-serve and figure out how you're protecting data as a software company. And then we help you really save time as well, ultimately spending a lot less time on things like formal security reviews, which can get very chaotic and become a lot of work very quickly.
So walk me through a little bit about like the origin story here. Like, why did you decide to work on this in this space and, build this solution with Trustpage?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a serial entrepreneur myself. I've been in software for a while, security for a couple decades. Essentially, this is a problem that I encountered while trying to scale my last company. We were called Ambassador, and we were in the MarTech space, and we were really looking to move up market, sell to more enterprise brands. And in doing so, quickly realized that security or cybersecurity, information security, those could become very big hurdles for us. Because all these companies we were talking to really, needed to make sure that we were protecting their data and protecting their customers. And so it was not only hard to build a security program, but it was also really hard to establish that trust with our customers. And there weren't really any tools in the space to help with that. And a lot of these processes were very outdated, archaic, very cumbersome. And so we had to figure out, how do we not let that get in the way of our growth? And how do we actually turn security into a competitive advantage? And so that was kind of the origin story for me. I was the one ultimately things like security reviews fell to. So I felt the most pain of that process. And so, really had to figure out how to turn that around. We were able to do that, and it really helped drive a successful acquisition for us. We really dominated the enterprise vertical in our space because of figuring that out. And so, when it was time for me to move on, I really had a strong passion, I think, for one, not putting myself through that again. And so building the tools that I was missing was pretty important, but also really spreading that and helping other founders, other security and technology leaders in the space also, not having to deal with these problems. It felt to me like something that was sort of systemic in our industry, and we didn't really have a good way to address that.
And I'm curious, just because, I don't know the answer. Like, I'm on your website right now, and like what you're doing obviously is extremely valuable. But I'm kind of curious, like, what's the persona of like the person who would see this and like, oh my gosh, like I need this now? Like, is it a founder of a small company? Is it like a head of HR, or like even like security at like a huge company? It's like, who are you building for, and like who would like use this in a primary use case?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of founders at early stage companies do have a lot to stand from getting started with something like Trustpage very early. It kind of is getting ahead of the problems that are coming so that you're not going to experience that pain when it's the time. The problem or the challenge is a lot of folks in that position don't realize that that's coming. And so we end up spending a lot of our time talking to folks who have already created a DIY, like build it yourself trust page. I think maybe 5-10 years ago, we started to see everyone creating a status page. to communicate things like their uptime. In the last few years, we've really seen a lot of companies now create their own security or trust pages to not just talk about things like uptime, but really all of security and privacy and compliance. And so we're kind of building off of that national momentum. So we generally talk to people who have already started doing that. These are usually companies who are already selling to the enterprise. They might be a little bit further along, Series B all the way to public SaaS. And we're usually talking to folks like CISOs, general counsels, right? So folks who are really leading the charge on their security and legal teams. Oftentimes though, like we'll get brought to those folks by other people in the team, right? Like whoever is actually completing things like security questionnaires, they're the ones who are kind of feeling the pains day in and day out. And oftentimes they see this as kind of a lifesaver or a life raft, right? And so they forward it up the chain, and then we get to meet the whole team and have a really good conversation.
And as you mentioned, this isn't your first rodeo. Like you've done this founder thing before. You were successful at it. I'm kind of curious, like doing it all over again. Is it easier? Is it like different but still hard? Like what's it like, being in the early stage founder seat all over again? And is it similar to the first time, or is it completely different? Like how do you kind of think about that?
That's a really great question. I've had a chance to talk to some other folks about this too, and I think the consensus is it actually never is easy, right? Some things get easier, other things get harder, and a lot of that is just because when you're first doing it, like you don't know what you don't know, so you're focused on what you know, and that might be hard. But every time you learn a bit more, you figure a bit more out, and you know a bit more, and you know more of what to be worried about or look out for, and so you kind of make it harder on yourself. Wherever it gets easier, you kind of feel like you end up offsetting that. So it definitely is different each time. I think a lot of stuff that you figure out the first time is easier the second and the third, but then there's always sort of new challenges. And I think also, at least for me personally, like I also hold myself to a higher standard. We're talking over the span of a decade, so I've also matured as a person. And so you start to care about a lot more things too that maybe you didn't care about before or didn't think about or didn't know, right? So there's a lot of things, particularly, how sort of the culture and the environment we build for our team, where I put a lot more pressure on myself to maybe avoid mistakes of the past, right? So how do you, just because you learned something didn't work the last time doesn't actually mean you have the solution yet. So, I think that's kind of the balance and what ends up happening for me and other folks I've talked to who are, serial founders. And for me this time too, I'm also going solo, which has been a bit of a new thing. And I have really fortunate to have a really great founding team around me, awesome investors and advisors, but there's certainly a challenge of having co-founders versus not as well. And that's been kind of an interesting dynamic too.
And as you keep all of that in mind, you'll go forward, you'll build this company, in like 5, 10, 15 years from now, if everything goes as planned, what is Trustpage going to look like then? Or I guess in other words, what's your big vision here and what direction are you rowing in with this company?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what's interesting about cybersecurity and information security is it's really made its way into the mainstream in the last few years. And unfortunately, that's because of bad news. And so things like SolarWinds, have kind of permeated really our culture, where people understand now that, and they understand things like privacy infringement and how, that's impacted them as well. And so, I think cybersecurity, or the lack thereof, and cybercrime is really becoming one of those existential threats. We obviously see things like cyber warfare too. So for us, I think our ultimate vision is to create a world where, we feel safe online, where we can trust that companies are taking care of our data, that they're respecting our privacy, governments as well. And ultimately that, we can trust the software and things that we rely on every day. I think with the pandemic, the need for that has also accelerated, because a lot of technology like Zoom that, it used to just be how, as a B2B SaaS founder, that's how we did business. Well, now it's how kids go to school and all sorts of other things. It's become sort of part of like the infrastructure of society. And so as technology has become more and more interwoven into daily life throughout the pandemic, I think that just increases, one, our need to be able to trust that software, and two, the need to be able to, overcome the challenges in our way. And so for Trustpage, we're looking to increase transparency and accountability around security and privacy in a way that I don't think has ever been done before.
In order to do that, you'll need some help, right? I mean, it takes a village to make a startup work and scale. So my question for you is, how can the forward-thinking founders community help? Are you hiring? Are you raising money, looking for customers, users, partners? How can we assist?
Yeah, I mean, almost all of those things. So we raised a $5 million seed round last year. We just announced that towards the end of the year, and so we're feeling great there. But yeah, we're definitely looking to help. So if there's people who are struggling, to communicate security, to get through things like security reviews, they're spending too much time, that's where we'd love to help. And so, in terms of customers or referrals, that's awesome. We are also hiring pretty much on every department. So we're ramping up our sales team, we're ramping up engineering team, data team, marketing. So, if someone's looking for a great place to work, I think we were just named to one of the best places to work list yesterday. And we have put, I think, a pretty exceptional focus on, the environment, the culture we're building, the benefits, and all of those things. So, I think it's a great place to be. So if folks are looking for that, if they're interested in security, privacy, software, all of those things, then, maybe they should check that out.
And then if someone wanted to, find you online, learn about what you're up to, potentially get involved, how can they find you? Like, do you have a website, social media presence, an email address? How can someone learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anyone's welcome to hit me up at chase@trustpage.com. If you send an email to hello@trustpage, you'll get some more folks too. But you can find us on Twitter @trustpage. We also hang out on LinkedIn too, so you can see myself and other members of the team dropping into threads and stuff there. But then if you go to trustpage.com, you can really find all of the above, learn more about us. And yeah, we're an open book. We're all about transparency. So, we love to connect.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.